All right. Thank you everyone so much for taking the time to join this training today. So today we're going to be going over the quarterly reporting requirements for Clark County's Community Action and Homeless Crisis Response System contracts. We are recording this meeting today, so if you need to go back and reference anything later, we'll send out the link for you all. All right, so first of all, we're going to talk about reporting requirements for the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS. For those who don't know, this is the online database that we use to track clients and services in the Clark County Homeless Crisis Response System. So not all Clark County programs are required to report in HMIS, um, and it will say in your contract whether or not this is a requirement. Typically, all programs providing services related to housing and homelessness will be required to report in HMIS, and you can reach out to your program coordinator if you're not sure if you meet this requirement. Most of you are already familiar with this system, but there are a few changes that we'll be discussing. So for programs that are required to use HMIS, the contract requirements include entering client data into HMIS when new clients are assisted, at reassessment, and as needed to keep system information current. Client data must be entered into HMIS no later than 10 days following enrollment. And data from the previous month must be entered into HMIS accurately by the 5th of each month. As you know, HMIS numbers must be included with each service on invoices, and county staff will double check that everything is entered correctly before approving invoices. Programs need to use HMIS to maintain unduplicated counts of persons that are served by the program. And as I mentioned before, there are a few exceptions, which include those covered under the Victims of Crime Act, those who refuse to sign the HMIS Release of Information waiver, programs that have received an exception from the county, for example, food assistance programs, and for programs that have received an exception, a paper file has to be kept and anonymous information provided to Council for the Homeless as requested. And again, if you're not sure if you have an exception, just reach out to your program coordinator to confirm. All right, now on to the new requirements. So in an effort to streamline and improve accuracy of the reporting process, we're adding a requirement for providers to track client achievement of national performance indicators, or NPIs, in HMIS. We'll talk more about these NPIs in detail later, but in short, these are outputs and outcomes which are designated by a federal reporting requirement. And there's a really large list of potential NPIs that you could report on, but each agency will work with your program coordinator, if you haven't done so already, to choose the NPIs that are appropriate for your program and set targets for the year. So each program only reports on NPIs that make sense for that program. These have historically been reported only in those quarterly reporting spreadsheets, which we'll talk about more in a bit. But the goal behind reporting them in HMIS is to create a system for providers to track these outcomes continuously throughout the program year, so they can be easily pulled and inputted into those quarterly report spreadsheets. And this tool is being added based on feedback we've gotten from providers regarding these challenges in tracking outcomes internally. So essentially, this will allow us to better track outcome achievement across the system, as well as view differences between programs for cohesive system management and improvement. We'll have you start tracking the NPIs in HMIS at the beginning of Q2, so starting October 1st. So there'll be no changes for the reports that are due for Q1. I just saw a comment in the chat. Is this being recorded? And will you share the presentation? Yes, it is being recorded, and we'll share the presentation afterwards. But at this time, I'll just ask you all to save your questions for the end when we'll have time for question and discussion. So continuing with NPIs, if needed, agencies can reach out to us for an exception if you'd like to utilize an internal or agency process for tracking these, but that will really be on case-by-case basis about whether it's appropriate for your program. And we are prepared to offer technical assistance to help agencies ease into this transition, and if there are any issues that arise with reporting in HMIS. So in a moment, I'm going to pass it over to Dale Whitley to walk through how this will look in the HMIS system and how to pull data for reports. But I just want to highlight real quick that due to some system limits in HMIS, some of the NPI labels will look slightly different in the HMIS system. So the NPIs are labeled based on the federal reporting requirements, and in HMIS, there's different labels. So we tried to match them as best as possible. And we'll be sending out a spreadsheet to you all that kind of provides a code for how to track these in HMIS. And for the most part, they are really similar. So for example, there's an NPI for financial coaching and counseling. And in HMIS, it reads as personal financial coaching. So it is pretty self-explanatory overall, but we will be sending out a spreadsheet to help with any confusion there. All right, so Dale, if you're ready, now I'll pass it over to you to share your screen and walk through how this will look in the HMIS system.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so when you get that, when you see that that crosswalk document that has a listing of the NPI outcomes, some of them are completed in the entry-exit stage, and some of them are completed as service transactions if they're services that were provided. And like Abby mentioned, there's a crosswalk. So, you know, for the NPI definition of what a service is, you'll also see what the HMIS one is. And once we have those all defined for everybody and you've identified these are the services that we believe that we could collect, we'll go through program by program to make sure that those are in your quick lists when you're creating a service transaction. So you'll have it there to select. So today I'm going to just show you in HMIS what it looks like within the training site to either to collect that information that will be collected at the entry or to create a service transaction. Just, you know, it's been a while since I've used Zoom, so I've got to figure it out. Okay, there it is. Okay, so we should be seeing the training site here. So you would look up a client like you normally do. In this case, if you already know their client ID number, you can just type that in. So this is a fake client in our test database environment. And the first thing you would do would be to create, you'd have your regular entry exit for them into your program. Heather, I apologize in advance. I'm using your login, shadowing it so we can see how it's set up for Aspire Community Funds currently. So within your entry, save and continue. You have your regular entry. So your program master, this should all look familiar, where you're entering the client's information. That you would do just as usual, but you would notice that you'll have an additional assessment up here for your ROMA outcomes. And so once you've completed all your regular questions and filled those in, you would move over to your ROMA outcomes. We'll do that now. And then you would have those questions that were identified for your program that you would be answering you'd identified would be collected for your program. So you can see this. You can see this. There's a question here. It says client achieved and maintained capacity to meet basic needs for 90 days. You would just choose whether at this time it was a yes or a no. And with the understanding that, not all of these may be collected, at the time of their entry into your program, many of these may be no at this time. But you would just go through and answer which ones had been, maybe they have already engaged in health and wellness service. So you would say yes, whatever their responses should be. And then you could save and exit. And then on their exit, when you go to complete that, program, destination, select one of those. You'll also have your Roma outcomes available there. So this is where, by the time that they are exiting the program, you should have a pretty good sense of whether they were able to achieve one of these goals. And you could go ahead, the answers at the entry will carry forward into the exit. So you could update those at this time if they had, by now upon their exit, they had demonstrated the improved mental health and behavioral health and well-being. You could change that to a yes. Make sure that all of these had been answered, either a yes or a no, and then save and exit. So that gets the data into the system that could be pulled for your report. So that's an example of those NPIs that would be recorded as outcomes within your entry or your exit. Now, a lot of them are going to be services as well. So to record a service, we would click Add Service and include as many household members should be included within that. You can adjust your start and end date to whenever that should have taken place. And then your service type. So this is the quick list that I was talking about before, that after you've identified what services you think will be appropriate for your program to be collected for this process, we would make sure those were then all added within this list so you'd immediately see them every time you went to create a service. So one of those it might be utility service payment. It might be, bus fare or gas money if it was a transportation type service, something like that, or information and referral if it was a referral service. Adding that here, you don't need to necessarily indicate where exactly that referral is made, but that one was made. So yeah, you would just choose whatever your service was and then hit save and continue. If there were any dollars for that service, you could then add that via a fund source. You would choose the appropriate fund source, and then that would give you a field to put in what those dollar amounts were. For information referral, there wouldn't be any dollars associated with that, so we'll leave that blank. For all services, normally we recommend that if the service has been provided, that you would mark it as closed and the outcome of the need would be fully met. They needed a referral, we gave them a referral, so that was fully met. And so you'd hit save and exit. Now, if we go back to our client information, we'll see a record of that service that was added and that entry information. So all of that will populate then your Roma outcome report. That is available in Business Objects. So if anyone doesn't have access to Business Objects to run custom reports, let me know. We can get that added to your user account. We try to add that for all users, but if for some reason that was missed and you don't have that ability to do that, or if you have any question about how to run a Business Objects report, let me know. We can send you a one-pager document on kind of a cheat sheet on how to run a Business Objects report. But I will show you a quick example of where that looks, where that exists as well. So I'm going to stop sharing this page and open that up.
Sorry, Dale, before we move on, can I ask a question, please?
Sure.
For the Romas, are they being captured in interims if it's between entry and exit?
Yeah, it could be updated as an interim as well.
Okay,
yeah, I'll have to look to see for your program. We could make sure that it's definitely set up as an interim for your program. But yeah, we definitely have that capability. Yeah, because if the client hasn't exited yet, but you want to update those as an interim, we could definitely add that if it's not already there.
that'd be great. Thank you.
So hopefully this will carry across. So to go to business objects, let's see here. Gotta move our faces. If you go to reports in HMIS and then scroll to the bottom, there should be this business objects box, and that takes you to our custom reports within HMIS. So is everybody able to see these different reports? Okay, great. Sometimes I always worry when it opens another window if that's still being shared. All right, so let's see, I'm just gonna move our faces again. So this, the way business objects works, you can have your favorite reports up here. So here are a couple that I've set as favorites that I run all the time. And I would probably recommend, if you're gonna be running this Roma report often, that you can set it as a favorite, or we can set it for you as a favorite if you request that as well. It also lists your recent documents. So these are reports that I've run recently, and you can see that one of those is that quarterly Roma characteristics and outcomes report. So if you click on that, it will then open it up with an HMIS. And then when you put your end date, your start date, and a provider in there, I'm not actually going to go through the process of running it, I think, at this point, but it would show you for each of your outcomes whether the count of clients that were included in that. So this will do this for those questions that were collected at your entry. So remember with that entry where you had your regular assessment and then you had your Roma assessment. Those yes or no's are what would be reported within here. So the services would not. We have other reports that do report services, and that's how you could collect information on those. We have several. We have a client serve report. I'll show you that in business objects. So this is a report that if we ran it would give a count for every type of service, how many clients receive that service within the time period that you're running it for. So if I ran it for the most recent quarter, it would give you your count of all those that had those information and referral service we just entered, or bus fares, each by type. And so that's where you could get your numbers or review those numbers to make sure that those are correct. Let's see. Okay. So back in HMIS, we also have a client server report right here. Sometimes this is a handy one. Let's see. So this is another one where you could run it and it would give you a count, but it doesn't give you an unduplicated count by client. It's kind of a more basic one that I run sometimes. So I could run that and we could look at it if somebody wanted to volunteer their program to look at the account of services. But I think for the most part, that client serve report from business objects would probably be your more useful one, as it does give you a count of like the total number of services and the unduplicated number of clients who received that service within that time period. Are there any questions? About the HMIS data entry reporting?
Bill, I see a question in the chat from Heather Young. It says, does that BI client served report pick up services that may have been entered outside of the entry/exit?
Outside of the entry/exit.
So like, will it pick up if they're not entered into the program and somebody accidentally gave them a bus pass? Do those end up in that client served business objects report? Because I use a different report. I'm not familiar with that one.
So they're not entered in the program, but somebody would only run it for the program that you're running it for. If it was a share house emergency shelter,
Right, but like
that service has to be entered for share house emergency shelter for it to show up.
Right. So for example, like our outreach program, we have bus tickets that are for people in program and people out of program. If we accidentally entered one for somebody who wasn't enrolled in our program, would it pick up that bus pass in that report? I know some of them do and some of them don't. Like I know the canned report will pick up services for people not checked in, or like say, yeah.
Yeah, so it depends on the type of report and how we coded that report. So there are some where I think this is what you were talking about, like they didn't have a program entry into the program, but somebody just created a service transaction for it. And so we have some that say they have to have an entry in the program and that service has to take place between their entry and their exit. And we have some reports that just say, show me all the services, whether they have an entry or not. And so, yeah, so I think that client served V1, I think looks at just the doesn't have the requirement of whether they have an entry into the program. But we do have other ones that do have that requirement. So depending on your needs, we could point you to the right one that would, only be for those who are entered in the program, or I don't care if they're entered or not. I want to see all the services for that program. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And as always, if anybody, this is just like a high level overview. So once you actually get in there and start trying to do this, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you. We could get together for a Zoom meeting and walk through the process and talk through any if you're unfamiliar with how to run the reports, things like that. I want to make it as easy for you as possible to do that. We don't want a situation where months go by and it wasn't quite being entered the right way for it to show up. We want to try and catch that as early as possible. So yeah, I just want to make sure everybody knows that this doesn't have to be the only time we meet to discuss this. And that this is the beginning of a process, because part of this process will also be defining which of your services and outcomes you're going to be collecting and reporting on. And then we'll be eventually letting you know when that's been updated in your HMS, so you can go in there and look and verify that those are there.
Thank you so much, Dale. Does anyone else have any other questions for Dale about the HMIS reporting?
I have a question going back to there was a section where Dale, you were talking about like if you see that they have like improved mental health. It had to do with the like mental physical health indicators. And I'm not sure, and this might be more than a Dale question, but I'm never quite sure how to like care, like if we're doing it by self-report, especially with the population that my programs are working with, where it's youth who are in crisis, like the self-reported answer is very dependent on how they're feeling in that moment, and not indicative of how they're doing in their life overall. And so is it supposed to be based on, is that particular element supposed to be based on self-report? Is it supposed to be based on observation? And if it is based on observation, is there some kind of method that we should be using so that the observations aren't so like varied depending on who's doing the observation or how they're feeling about the client on that particular day when they happen to be filling in this information?
Yeah, that's a good question, Alaire. I think that question goes a bit broader than this specific training, since it's about, how your agency will be tracking your specific outcomes for your clients. So I think I would recommend reaching out to the program coordinator for that program to discuss with them, tracking strategies for your agency and the specific outcomes that you're curious about.
So I have a question in regards to that Roma outcome report. Is that something that everybody should be seeing on their report dashboard? Because I'm not seeing it on mine.
Yeah, so it may not have been added yet. Yeah, like I mentioned, this is kind of the beginning of the process of identifying which outcomes and services are going to be tracked for each program. So that there will be, that will need to be identified, and then we'll get them added if it's determined that those are, because even those, that group of outcomes that we looked at for that PSH program may be different for different programs. So if you're looking at your program and you're not seeing it, we haven't identified that, and those haven't been added yet. But that's part of what may happen throughout this process once those are determined.
Okay, just making sure I wasn't missing something.
No.
Dale, I know that we had talked the other day and was trying to get things added into our programs. I am pretty sure we're going to be reaching out to you as a small group to have our what we're seeing reviewed and making sure that we do have the right things. Just heads up.
Yeah, no, like I said, once we, have figured out for each program what they're going to be, I'll go through the process of adding them, confirming with you that you're seeing them, make sure that we added it correctly. Yeah, because we don't want anything to be missed. We want you to see all the services you're supposed to see and all the outcomes you're supposed to see to get those responses added.
Are there any other questions about the HMIS reporting? All right, hearing none, thank you so much, Dale, for being here and for walking everyone through what that looks like in the system. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen, and we're going to get into specifics about the quarterly report spreadsheets now. And we'll have more time for questions at the end of this section of the meeting as well. All right, so here's just an overview about the quarterly report spreadsheets. So all homeless crisis response system and community action program contracts require regular reporting. And the purpose of this reporting is to track goals and outcomes of specific programs as well as the system as a whole, to understand who is being served, and more importantly, maybe who's not being served and whose needs are not being met, and to help agencies stay on track with program goals and ensure programs are meeting their contractual requirements. These reports are really important and impactful. They're used and shared broadly with the Community Action Advisory Board, the County Council, and Council for the Homeless to help with system planning and evaluation purposes. So it's really important that we understand how the system's operating, who is and isn't being served, what needs are and aren't being met. And it's important that reports are accurate to have a good understanding of this. The report template is provided in an Excel spreadsheet by county staff. If you haven't already received your report template from your program coordinator, you will soon. And if you have multiple contracts with Clark County, you'll receive a separate report template for each program, since outcomes and targets are specific to each program. Each report has several sections, which I'll go into shortly, and all are required to be completed and turned in on the 15th of the month following each quarter. So quarter one is July through September. That report's due October 15th. Quarter two is October through December, which is due January 15th. Quarter three is January through March. That report's due April 15th. And quarter four is April through June. This report is actually due July 30th. We provide an extension on this year-end report since we also know we're asking a lot of you for meeting those year-end invoice deadlines. So just give folks a little bit of extra time to finish up that final report. All right, so this is what your report template may look like. This one is blank and just kind of shows an example of what it may look like. And like I said, the specific services and goals will be different for each program. But there's a few things I want to highlight on this template. So first, there are 3 tabs along the bottom of the spreadsheet. Let me get my little laser pointer. So there's 3 tabs here at the bottom. The only one that you need to fill out each quarter is this middle tab, which is labeled with your program. It won't say program, it'll say something like share PSH or something like that. The instructions tab also has a lot of great information about how to fill out each section, and I'll go over a lot of that information today. And then the NPIs tab on the right lists out all of the potential national performance indicators that we mentioned, and that could be reported for each program. We're going to get into these more in detail later. Just know that this tab here is a resource, but doesn't need to be filled out each month. And then in this middle report tab, you'll see at the top your agency, your program contact, county contact at the top. And then it goes into the sections of the report. And in each section, there's 4 different colored columns for each quarter. So each report, you only need to fill out the column for that quarter. So for example, for quarter 1, you'll fill out the pink columns that are labeled July through September. And then quarter 2, you'll fill out the green columns. And the data that you enter will automatically populate in the gray totals columns for most activities. Some activities that are calculated as percentages, you'll need to enter yourself, and we'll get into that more in detail later too. And then the target explanation column at the right in orange is used to provide any explanations at the end of the year for numbers that are outside of the proposed range. This year-to-date within range column automatically calculates this and will have a red no if the number is out of range at the end of the year. Again, you only need to fill this out at the end of the year because, partway through the year, you probably won't have reached your targets yet. And the spreadsheets that you receive will be locked, and you'll only be able to fill out cells you use to report. Like I mentioned, there's multiple sections in each report. Not all programs have all of these sections depending on your reporting requirements. For example, this first section is only for homeless crisis response system programs, so community action programs won't have this. And this last section for client characteristics is only for programs that don't report in HMIS. Again, there's instructions for completing each section in the instructions tab, and I'll also walk through each one in detail now. Before we dive into the specific sections, I just want to go over some general guidelines that do apply to all sections. So first, we're asking you to report the unduplicated number served and outcomes achieved. Unduplicated means that the individual or household is counted only one time during the reporting period, which is the fiscal year, no matter how many times they receive that service or activity. And like I said, the reporting period in this case is the whole year. So if an individual receives a service in quarter 1 and again in quarter 3, they would only be counted in quarter 1. Data can be duplicated across service activities. For example, the same individual and household can be reported under multiple activities as appropriate. For example, if an individual receives rent assistance, they'd be counted once in the rent assistance category. And if they receive food assistance, they would also be counted once in the food assistance category. But individuals are not duplicated across reporting periods. So like I mentioned, if an individual receives rent assistance in quarter 1, and they receive another round of rent assistance in quarter 3, they would only be reported in quarter 1 because that's how many, individuals were served. For goals that ask for a percent, median, or average data rather than a sum of numbers, that gray totals column will not automatically calculate, and you'll need to enter the total manually during the 4th quarter. So there's some outcomes that ask for what percent of clients achieved this goal. And so in each quarter, you'll enter that percent. And then at the end of the year, you'll enter the total in the gray column based on the percent for the whole year that achieved that outcome. And these cells are not locked. They don't have a formula, and they'll be labeled in light gray rather than dark gray. And as I mentioned earlier, if proposed goals are not met at the end of the fiscal year, make sure to include an explanation in that orange explanations column. All right, now let's get into specifics on each section. So the first section of the report is called system level goals, and this section will only show up for homeless crisis response system contracts. These are goals that are set for the homeless crisis response system to achieve on a system level. And all programs within an intervention type, such as permanent supportive housing, are working to achieve the same set of goals. For example, permanent supportive housing programs are expected to increase exits to permanent housing. For this section, you'll enter the unduplicated numbers served in each quarter. And the data source used to gather this information is provided for each activity in this data source column. If you're unsure exactly where, say in the HMIS dashboard to find this, you can reach out to Dale and ask for his help. The example goal here is listed as a percent rather than a number. This is an example of that percent type data that I was mentioning earlier. So for this report example, this agency would need to manually enter the year-to-date total in the totals column since it doesn't auto-populate. And you'll see it's like a slightly lighter gray. All right, the next section is service activities, and this section will be on all of the reports. These are goals that are identified by each agency and listed within the contract. Goals may have been determined through a request for application or negotiated directly with program staff if the programs didn't go through the RFA process. This section includes both program outcomes and outputs from the contract. Outputs will be listed in green font, and these are the service activities provided by the program. For example, number of people served, hours of participation, workshops provided, etc. Outcomes are listed in blue font, and these are the changes, results, or impacts that occur due to the service being provided. For example, the outcome would be housing stability, which is the result of rent assistance provided. Again, you'll enter the unduplicated number served here for each quarter. Continuing with this section, most homeless crisis response system programs will also have a caseload calculation in the service activities section. So in the first row of this section, you'll enter the average number of full-time employees that work in this program. Or working with households in this program only. This doesn't relate to other programs that your agency may see, it's just for this program. For staff working in multiple programs, only include the equivalent time dedicated to this program. So for example, if 2 full-time staff work in the program, one is working half their hours in the program, and one is working 3/4 of their hours, the FTE equivalent would be 1.25. And then in the second row, you'll enter the number of households served. Oops, sorry. The number of households served in that reporting period. And all family members are included in one household. This number may be duplicated across reporting periods, so you'll enter all of the households served in each quarter, even if they were reported in the last quarter. And then the report will automatically calculate the caseload per full-time employee. And if the year-end value exceeds the caseload maximum, we ask that you include a brief explanation. And you'll report this both quarterly and at the full year end. I see Beth's hand raised. Go ahead, Beth.
Abby, I'm pretty sure that we're doing this correctly, but just want to ask, since we're at the beginning of the year and we have reports soon. So with our shelter program in particular, there's multiple funding streams into it, but it's one collective program. So when we're reporting on, so like our county contract only supports a portion of the program, but we report all participants because they're still touched or affected by the funds, so that we're still reporting all staff, even if they're not funded, right? So you can get the complete picture. Am I understanding that correct?
So to clarify, you're saying that the county only funds a portion of the program, but you're reporting the clients and full-time employees for the whole program, not just the portion that the county funds.
Correct.
Okay, I'm gonna let Kayla take that question actually, since she's our homeless crisis response system program coordinator.
Hi, Beth.
Hey.
Yeah, go ahead and report for all these programs just on that whole picture, because we are just going to use it for like those advocacy efforts as well. So we definitely want to not create more work for you guys, and we want to see how your program is operating on at its whole capacity.
Okay, cool. That's what we have been doing, and I was pretty sure it's correct. And if y'all, hopefully you don't, but if you ever have a need to separate it out, if you could try to give us like a 6 month heads up, because it'll just be a lot of, a lot of things. So,
I
but thank you.
Of course, I do think that it hopefully now that we're reporting in HMIS, well, I guess it will be a little bit different for you guys utilizing your similar database. If you have the capacity to make sure that you have the opportunity to do those fund source within those service transactions, however you guys are tracking, that's what I would say. That's what we check for billing within HMIS each month, that the fund source matches up with whatever fund we're working on. And if it doesn't, we'll reach out to the agency. So we should be able to, without any more work, be able to separate out based on the clients that are served with those funds. But I think it would probably just take some testing and some messing around and coordination with Dale.
Yeah, we have that with our alternative database. We just right now what we don't have is the individual shelter beds or rooms are not allocated by a specific fund source. And we have our overall percentages and other targets, but it's not room by room right now that's set up. So I think that would, like, if that's ever a need, just let us know. It just takes some time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. That was a great question. Any other questions on this before I move on? All right, hearing none. So one thing that I just want to reiterate and clarify about this caseload calculation section is that it is a little bit different from the other sections of the report in that data is duplicated across each reporting period, or each quarter. So you'll be reporting each quarter as if it's like its own reporting period. So in quarter one, if you had X many staff and X many participants, we do that so that we can really calculate the caseload calculation individually each quarter and make sure that it's meeting requirements. All right, the next section is about National Performance Indicators, or NPIs. So we talked about these earlier, but as I mentioned, these are outputs and outcomes that are designated in a federal reporting requirement for all programs that are overseen by the Community Action Advisory Board. So this includes all homeless crisis response system and community action programs. This section, like I said, is customized based on the services that are regularly provided by each program. A master list of service activities can be found in that NPIs tab. And if you haven't already done so, you'll work with your program coordinator to select the NPIs that apply to your specific programs and establish targets for the year. This section also has outcomes and outputs separated out. So again, outcomes are in blue font and outputs will be in green. For outcomes, you'll be asked to enter the unduplicated number of individuals or households served and the number who actually achieved the outcome. So for example, say 100 households received eviction prevention rent assistance. You would put that in the number served. And then only 90 of these households actually achieved the outcome and avoided eviction. So you'd enter 100 in the number served column and 90 in the outcomes achieved column. And it's possible for an individual or household to be served in one quarter and not achieve the outcome until a future quarter. And that's fine. But if this is the case, they should only be marked as achieving the outcome in the later quarter, not as being served a second time. And then for outputs, you'll only need to enter the unduplicated number served because these are just service activities. So there isn't a difference between who was served and who achieved the outcome. And we know this section can be confusing, so please feel free to reach out to your program coordinator if you're ever unsure how to enter the data. As we discussed earlier, starting in Q2, you'll be able to pull this information directly from HMIS and enter it into this spreadsheet at the end of each quarter. And we're really hoping that this helps agencies improve accuracy of their tracking and have a system to continuously track these outcomes throughout the quarter so that when it comes time to report, you can just easily pull your report and input the data rather than trying to like go back through client files and figure out how to report this data. If you're unsure what any of the NPIs mean or how to track them, we have a list of definitions which were determined by federal funding requirements, and we'll walk through this list at the end of the meeting, and we'll share it with you all after the meeting. But if you have any questions about specific NPIs, you can also feel free to reach out to us. All right, the next section reports on customer satisfaction surveys. So all programs are required to provide participants the opportunity to provide feedback about the program. And this can be done at a set point during the program year or at program exit. Agencies must provide to us an overview of the responses, including negative, neutral, and positive feedback. And we really encourage direct quotes from participants where possible. So the report spreadsheet asks you to enter the number of individuals or households who were provided a survey to complete during the reporting period, the number of individuals or households who completed the survey in the reporting period, and these two indicators automatically calculate the response rate. You'll also enter the number of positive responses to the question within the satisfaction survey that designates participants' overall experience, and the number of neutral or negative responses to the question in the satisfaction survey that designates participants' overall experience. And then we ask you to provide an overview or direct quotes about the satisfaction of participants received through the satisfaction survey. And if there's any negative responses, please provide clarification about that. And the response rate and overall positive satisfaction rate are automatically calculated in the spreadsheet based on the information that you provide. Programs are also required to provide participants the opportunity to grieve a decision made by the program, and they must provide that policy to participants upon entry into the program. And then agencies must provide an overview of grievances received each quarter in the report. This includes the number of individuals or households who filed a verbal or written grievance in the reporting period, the number of individuals that the number of grievances that have been resolved in the reporting period, which may include grievances that were initiated in a previous reporting period, the status of any unresolved grievances, including a deadline that they must be resolved by, and the nature of any grievances that you have received. The next section is community engagement, which helps us track volunteer engagement within each program and across the system. For this section, you'll enter the unduplicated number of volunteers that provided services to the program during the reporting period. If a volunteer provides services to the program more than one time throughout the year, you'll only count that person in the first quarter that they volunteer, but you will include their hours in future quarters. So you'll enter the number of all volunteer hours provided to the program during the reporting period as well. And then you'll enter the number of volunteer hours provided by low-income residents to the program. And this information should be included in the total amount of volunteer hours as well. So for example, if there were 100 volunteer hours, 30 of those were by low-income volunteers, you would enter 100 in that total number and 30 in the number of hours by low-income volunteers. For programs that don't collect income information about your volunteers, you'll only report in the number of all volunteers row. Kayla, I see your hand raised.
I just want to do a specific call out really fast because we have seen some agencies misinterpret what this section is trying to obtain information on. So just make sure when you're reporting on the number of volunteers and their hours, it is specific to that particular program that you are reporting on. It is not for your agency as a whole to report the number of volunteer hours. Or if you are, say, operating in a shelter that also has transitional housing beds in there as well, you would want to make sure you're tracking those differences or allocating the proportion of volunteer hours based on the proportion of funds that you get for each activity type. I see Emma just raised her hand.
Yeah, hi. So I just want to confirm this is also the total auto sum. So we should, after quarter, well, I guess for every quarter, we're just reporting new volunteers. So even if someone has volunteered in Q1, Q2, Q3, they should only be counted in Q1 so that you get an accurate year-to-date total, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, thank you, Emma. So to clarify, for that first row where it asks for number of volunteer persons, that needs to be an unduplicated count. So you're only reporting new volunteers in each quarter. The number of volunteer hours, however, is just the number of volunteer hours for that quarter. So that those will all add up from each quarter to that year-end total. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Any other questions or comments on this? All right, moving forward, the next section is agency coordination. So all programs providing direct services are required to update 211 info with their program information at least annually. So in this agency coordination section, you'll just indicate the date that the program was last updated. And then finally, programs that do not use HMIS are required to provide participant demographic information in the client characteristics section. And again, this section will only show up in your report if you're not reporting in HMIS. For this section, we don't expect all demographic information to be collected for all programs because there's a lot of different possible demographics in this section. So you'll just enter the information that you do collect. And again, for this section, you'll enter the unduplicated number served for each demographic listed that's collected by the program. And then this final slide just includes some key definitions that may be helpful as you fill out this report. I'm not going to read through each of these definitions since they can all be found in the instructions tab of the quarterly report spreadsheets. And this training is being recorded, so you can come back to this slide if you need. But just know that these are available and some key definitions you might want to know, which include the difference between children and youth, how to calculate full-time employees, the difference between individuals and households, and what is used to calculate living wage. Next, I'm going to pass it off to Kayla to pull up that full spreadsheet of national performance indicators that we discussed and go through some of those specific definitions that apply for the homeless crisis response system.
Thanks, Abby. I will snag your screen. Let me know when y'all can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so different this year than previous years. Abby and I have been going back and forth a lot due to some feedback, some inconsistencies in reporting that we had been seeing. And Abby did a lot of research to try to hunt down what we could for you guys. And luckily, she was able to find a full list of definitions for all of our NPIs. So it should make sure that we are all on the exact same page and we're reporting our outcomes in an equitable manner. So we will send out this sheet, which has a full list of all of the NPIs and their definitions. Up top on this very first page, you're going to see a little just note of what qualifies as a youth, adult, or senior, and then a reminder for the served being the unduplicated number of participants who received that service, and achieved being that actual number who achieved that goal. So the example that Abby used earlier for EPRAP, If everybody's goal, so 100 people have a goal of avoiding eviction, 100 people, if you have 100 people in program actively, are being served to achieve that goal. But there could only be, say, like 20 of those 100 in program that first quarter that achieve that goal. So then the next quarter, quarter two, you would have, if you had no intakes, you would have 0 served because those 100 were already accounted for in Q1. And you may have 80 achieving, which would total the whole 100% achievement of everybody being served, meeting that goal. The other thing in here that's important to note, we went and we grayed out some areas that we don't believe are particularly relevant or the focus of our homeless crisis response system. So any NPIs that are grayed out, we don't expect you to go in and report data on. And then the other important thing to note in here is in this sheet, you'll see these areas that have yellow highlights. This is before Abby found the definitions for us. I had worked closely with you guys to identify some of those NPIs that should be existing in all of your programs. So all these highlighted boxes right here include the HMIS service activity. There's some that are missing. So we will work with Dale to get those added for any of the ones that are missing. But for the most part, this way you have the definition, you have the NPI, and you have the HMIS service transaction that you'll be coding that activity to. What I would ask for all of the programs is that you guys go through the full list of definitions. And this year, we're not going to build in your reporting past those yellow highlighted ones that we already agreed and established on, mostly because Abby has a deadline that we need to get those off and solidify those. So I would just ask that you guys are aware of the full list of definitions, because come the next time we do reporting, we are going to ask for a full assessment of all the things that you are doing in program, so we can most accurately share the information on those efforts that are occurring in the system. So get familiar with them, reach out if you have questions. But other than that, we are hoping that you guys can utilize this as a tool that will better lay the foundation for everybody providing services under CAP programs. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Kayla. Now we'll open it up for questions about reporting. So if anyone has any questions or comments that you want to share with us, now would be a great time to do so.
I do have a question. So with the outcomes, I'm thinking about, like, especially our shelter program. So we run a youth shelter, and it's really common for youth to enter and exit shelter multiple times throughout the year. Certainly not every youth, but it happens enough that that it's a common event. It's also, because we're serving youth, fairly common for, like, youth who have a tendency to run away, to, like, come into shelter, run, come into shelter, run, come into shelter, run. And then each time they're sort of building a sense of, like, familiarity and safety with the program. And maybe, hopefully, at some point we'll decide that we are a safe place to stay, and we'll stay. I feel like if we're reporting their outcome in quarter one of, like, we had this intake and the outcome was bad because they ran away, but then, 6 months later, they've come into our shelter 3 or 4 more times, and this time they've stayed, and we've helped them reconcile with family or get into some other safe living situation. That outcome was already recorded in the first quarter as a bad outcome, but really it was just one step in the process of getting them to a positive outcome eventually. Like, I'm not sure how to reflect that in the report.
So, Alaire, what I would say is that I think it'll get time to getting used to this approach, but you should be able to move that person's outcome. So, like, you can adjust that Q1 as long as you have an explanation for it. That way, when we take it to the CAB to report on it that next period, if there's a change to it, so say you have this one person accounted for the outcome in Q1, add a negative into that next quarter. So it would just account for how they're changing and moving through the program, and then just provide the county staff that information when you're submitting so that we get the full story and we can relay that to our advisory board.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
One other thing I do want to say, because I know I've had a conversation, at least with Al, who's in here, about the duplication that occurs across service years, because we do reporting annually and then we do it again. It is right now our understanding that we are going to continue that duplication, if you will, in the first quarter of every year. That way we have an annualized amount. So you will see a duplication between individuals who are still in program from quarter 4 of one year into quarter 1 of the new year. So just be aware of that.
Can I just clarify? I want to make sure I understand what you just said. So quarter 1 of the current reporting year, even if they didn't do an intake in quarter 1, because they already did an intake in the last quarter, will still count as a new intake because it's the first part of the year?
Not
that
as an
correct?
intake, but yes, as a served.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically you're going to be starting over the count each fiscal year, if that makes sense. Yeah, go ahead, Renee.
So when we're pulling the reports from HMIS, are those going to show us the unduplicated numbers?
Yes, they should.
Or is it going to show us just the total for that? Okay.
Sorry. Yes, I believe that the reports you pull from HMIS should show the unduplicated numbers. I'm not sure if Dale is still on because I know he had to hop off. But we'll chat with Dale and, work through any complications that arise as we're doing that. Yes, Heather.
Hi, I'm not sure if we're going to have this question again, but I'm assuming we are. When we're talking about like clients who are maintaining or increasing income, generally when that's been asked in the past, it's been asked as a percentage, and we usually do, I guess, how do you want to see that percentage each quarter? Do you want to see the percentage of the people that are in that quarter or only the people that haven't been counted prior? Does that make sense?
Sorry, struggling to unmute. That does make sense. I might need to think on that one a little bit more, and look at the specific indicator that you're talking about, before I give a definitive answer there. So maybe let's chat offline about that one, Heather.
Okay, thanks. I have one more question too. Sorry, I was trying to ask it earlier and I couldn't. For the question where you're talking about the FTE and the household served. For shelter, we were instructed, but it was years ago, so I just want to make sure that it's still the same. We were instructed that we could use household served, not the total number of households served, but the total capacity of the shelter at one given time, because we might have served 30 households during the quarter, but we can only serve 16 households at one specific time. So that was the number that we were using. And I guess I just want to make sure that that's still okay, or if you want us to change that.
Kayla, do you have an answer to that question?
I don't have the answer to that question, but I would say we're going to want to understand that average, based on the actual amount of people you serve, so we can best understand your staff's capacity, because that's directly going to relate to kind of the outcomes that we're seeing and the differences between programs, right? If one shelter is having case managers manage a lot more households than another and their outcomes are impacted by that, we're going to want to be able to have a conversation around that as well. But Heather, let me double check with the other coordinators and team, who may have had a say in that previous decision. I also want to say that for the percentages too, I do think that Abby and I can touch base. I would prefer where we can to move away from percentages because I do see that there are issues with how we're tracking some of those items. And I think that it would be a good idea, at least for NPIs, to track actual numbers served because that is what they ask of us to be reporting when Abby's reporting back to HUD for those items. So hopefully you won't see as many of the percentages that are a little finicky that you have to mess with. But I will touch base with everyone when Abby and I have a chance to decide that.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yes, Emma.
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of a follow-up to both the, to a couple questions that have already been asked, one about, maintaining and increasing income, and then also one about, achieving outcomes and how that can be vary quarter to quarter. So if we have someone who, they're in the program, whatever program, they may be in the program for multiple quarters. One quarter, we see that they do increase their income, which is great. Next quarter, for whatever reason, they may lose their job or their income decreases or something. So we're reporting that as they achieve that outcome, say in Q1, but then Q2, they did not. Would we just basically kind of what Kayla was saying, like take that into account and make it a negative? Or do we really only report like when they achieve that outcome? So over the course of the year, if at one point in any quarter, they maintain or increase their income, we report them one time, then we don't report them again. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so we want to strive to have these numbers be unduplicated. So I think the best option would be your second suggestion, which is to just, if they maintain or increase their income within the reporting year, just report them once, because we don't really need to see, like they increase their income quarter one and then it decrease and then it increase and then it decrease, because that gets confusing about how many individuals were actually served or how many individuals were achieving that outcome. So I would keep it, on an individual by individual basis, just reporting for each individual one time throughout the year.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Just to go off that though, I have a question, because then like if we're, it could possibly be that if nobody exited in quarter one, we're not reporting any income in quarter one if we don't know for sure if they're going to lose their job. You know what I mean? So it could look like nothing, 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 and then Q4 you've got all these potential things. Is that what you want to see?
That is okay, depending on some outcomes just might look like that because of the nature of how they're being tracked and reported. If we don't know what's happening with clients until they're exited from program, then that outcome wouldn't be reported until they exit from program, and that's okay. Because when we look at if agencies are or are not meeting their targets, their contracted targets, we do that at the end of the year. So there's no, issues if agencies haven't met their goals partway through the year. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, thank you. I think we've had people just reach out like midway through before, like this number seems weird and weird. Yeah, so I think that, but that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and on a case-by-case basis, we may ask for explanations. I think for that one specifically, it definitely makes sense that you might not be able to see that until the end of the year. And we'll just have you work with your program coordinator specifically. Like if your program coordinator has concerns, then we can have conversations throughout the year about it.
And Abby, too, I would add that double check when we send out that definition sheet, because a few of those, they're not just specific to MPI definitions. There's also definitions for that section if you do need to know like a particular. So I know for the employment section, for example, obtaining employment, they define as they entered program with no employment, and then they obtained it as a result of program effort. which should be reflected. But if your program is not actually assisting that client in obtaining that employment, increasing their income, then that would be like outside of reporting, outside of what your program actually does. That's a client's own independent attempt, and that shouldn't be reflected there. So just make sure you review those definitions, and once we have, if you have feedback after that, then we can chat through what it looks like.
Go ahead, Emma.
Hi, sorry, just one more. It really is about this maintaining and increasing income outcome. This one's always just tricky. So I feel like in the past, and maybe I'm mistaken, we've reported it just based on when they achieved that income, regardless of whether they exited the program. But it sounds like almost in what was just said, we should only be counting, like, using people who exit, or looking at our exit numbers for that one. So for whether folks maintained or increased income, should we look at just folks who maintained or increased income at any point, like regardless of whether they exited, or should we only look at exited participants in that quarter and whether those exited participants achieved or increased or maintained income?
That is a good question. And I think when you decide to report this can kind of be up to programs on what works best for you. The main priority on our end is that data is accurate and unduplicated. So if you decide to report, mid-program when clients increase their income, and then not report them again at exit, that's fine. Or if you just want to report them at exit and not during the program, that's also fine. It's really, whatever's best for you all, since we don't want to create tons of reporting burden or make you change your systems up. On our end, it just really matters that numbers are accurate and unduplicated. Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. So essentially it's up to us as long as we're consistent.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, well, hearing none, it looks like we can finish up early and give you all 45 minutes of your day back. So I really appreciate all of your time to attend this training and all the great questions that you have, and again for all of your work in the community and to help us ensure that we're gathering correct data and tracking and improving the system. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. I'll send a follow-up email with the recording of this training, the PowerPoint, and that spreadsheet that Kayla showed. And again, we are here if you have any questions moving forward, and totally understand that any transitions can be challenging. So feel free to reach out if there's anything that we can do to help.